Welcome, everyone. I'm David Greenwald, the founder and director of the Davis Vanguard. This is now rapidly becoming our weekly webinar. This time we're going to be talking about LGBTQ issues and life in Davis. And I'm going to turn it over to Jordan and Lauren, who will moderate this forum. So welcome, everyone.
Hello, and welcome everyone to the Vanguard Forum webinar series where we focus on culture and politics around Davis. I am one of your hosts, Jordan and Varney. I use she, they pronouns, and with me is my co-host and co-editor, Lauren Smith.
Hi, I'm Lauren, and my pronouns are she, her.
And as David said, we are the student editors of the Vanguard City News Desk. So we are lucky today to be joined by three guests who are doing influential and important work in Davis. So would you all like to introduce yourselves and talk briefly about what organization or group you represent? We can go Kait, Anoosh, B.
Cool, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Kait Murray. I use she, her pronouns. I've been in Davis for 4 years. I came here as part of working a staff job at UC Davis. But right now I'm a PhD student in science and agricultural education, where I study queer and trans experiences in agricultural education specifically. And I, as part of that, work as a graduate student researcher at the LGBTQIA Resource Center on campus, where I'm responsible for all of our graduate and professional student facing programming, retention work, outreach. And we also do research on the experiences of queer and trans graduate students, professional students, and staff on campus.
Hi, my name is Anoosh Jorjorian. I use she and they pronouns. I'm primarily here in my capacity as coordinator for YOLO Rainbow Families, which is a project of the Davis Phoenix Coalition. YOLO Rainbow Families has a parent group, which is, sorry, I'm getting texted right now. So we have a parent group, which is for LGBTQ plus parents, as well as parents of LGBTQ plus kids. And we also have a teen group, which is open to all junior high and high school students. Davis Phoenix Coalition also runs Davis Pride every year. I'm also one of the co-founders of the Apoy YOLO project, which supports Spanish-speaking immigrant communities in Yolo County during the COVID-19 pandemic. Plus, I started creating inclusive Davis schools, which is currently advocating for ethnic studies within the Davis school system.
Hi, everyone. I'm B. I use they, them pronouns. I am a recent graduate as of this week. So yeah, I literally graduated this quarter, but I'm still working at the LGBTQIA plus Resource Center as a community coordinator. So a lot of the work that I do, it's a balance between social gatherings and like making community feel welcomed and included, but also social justice work. So we provide a lot of resources for students on the Davis campus. One of the current projects I'm working on is I'm working with folks from the Gender Health Clinic in Sacramento and the Joan Viteri Memorial Clinic, which is a student-run clinic. And we're making educational videos that center the queer and trans experience in medicine. So if you're looking for HRT or hormone replacement therapy, what kind of questions will doctors ask you? What kind of things should you be prepared for? I'm applying to medical school, so I'm really interested in the intersections of being a marginalized person, such as being a person of color, being queer, being trans, and just trying to survive in this capitalistic world where healthcare is not accessible.
Thank you and welcome to all our guests. Today we will be discussing LGBTQ plus life and activism in Davis. As a side note, I might slip up and use queer interchangeably with LGBTQ+. What someone identifies is their own business, so I apologize if I include you in an umbrella term that you do not identify with. So first, I wanted to share some sobering statistics about being LGBT in California in the US. So in California, 5.3% of the population identifies as LGBT, and that subset is more likely to be unemployed or food insecure than the cisgender heterosexual community. So far this year in the US, at least 10 trans or gender nonconforming people have been fatally shot or killed. Last year, that number was 44, a majority of whom were Black and Latinx trans women. So let's have a minute of silence to remember all the trans and gender nonconforming folks that have lost their lives due to transphobic violence this year and in previous years. If you would like to learn about the lives of the people we have lost this year and honor them, Lauren is going to place a link in the chat that has bios and information about them. So now we are going to move on to the questions we have prepared for our panelists today. The first half of this program will be questions that Lauren and I have written, and the second half we will go into audience questions. So feel free to ask your questions in the chat and we will get to them in the second half of the program. Though if they're relevant during the conversation, we can always address them as we go. Okay, so our first question, what impact do you think being LGBTQ+ has on your day-to-day life in Davis? Yeah, sorry. Feel free to hop in whenever you want. This is just a conversation, so have at it.
So I'm in slightly weird position of being queer, but being married to a cisgender man. So I have quite a bit of heterosexual privilege. And so there's a whole lot of like re-coming out that has to happen. So a lot of people tend to assume that I'm heterosexual and cisgender, and then I have to disabuse them of that notion. And interestingly, like there's a lot of us, like femme presenting queer folks in Davis who are in what look like opposite sex marriages. And so there's a lot of what I call stealth queers around. So I am in the position of, identifying as part of the LGBTQ+ community, being very involved, not only in, having a history of being very involved in the community and activism, but also deeply invested in the future. And so, there's a lot of kind of still heterosexist assumptions that happen in Davis, even though Davis is, generally perceived as liberal, and certainly compared to many places, it's a good place to live if you are LGBTQ+, especially if you're a child. But then there's still kind of microaggressions and heterosexism that happens. Like, we were still having Mother's Day and Father's Day in schools, which for kids with two parents of the same gender, made them feel excluded and strange. And so we've been, it's just little things like that that you think people would have already taken care of that still come up.
I'd love to jump in. I think there's a lot of work in balancing self-care and also wanting to educate other people, especially in the position of like working at a resource center. I'm always in the position of when I'm faced with a microaggression, I'd rather assume ignorance than malice. So I'd rather educate someone than assume that they're trying to hurt me. But with that, it puts a lot of undue or unwarranted labor on people who are marginalized. And so I have a really similar experience where I had to navigate this feeling of being really femme presenting, but knowing that I'm non-binary. And so the way that I walk through the world, I had a lot of internal questioning where I wondered if I was non-binary enough because I wasn't androgynous enough, and having to unlearn that and being kind with myself. And so I think that there's a lot of different layers to being LGBTQIA in any space, but I've really been making an intentional focus on we talk a lot about critical love at the UC Davis LGBTQIA plus Resource Center, which is the idea that if you care about something, you love it enough to critique it and to help it improve and educate it. But with that, a counter side to that is radical softness. I really embrace the idea of we need to be kinder to ourselves and we need to be softer. So I try to make an active effort to be soft with myself and know that I don't need to take on the labor of educating every single person or correcting every single microaggression. But again, that puts pressure in different ways. So it's a balancing act.
Yeah, I think those are really great points. When I moved to Davis, I was coming from a very large city in the Midwest and grew up in a very rural small town. And so the perceived climate of Davis was, as at the time a person in a lesbian relationship, it was a huge factor in my decision to move here in terms of I work in agriculture, and so issues of safety, physical safety, emotional safety are not something I take for granted in my line of work and in the places that I live. And so coming to Davis, that was a large part of the decision to move here versus going to any other university, especially an agricultural focused university. The feelings of physical safety, relatively speaking, in this town were a big part of it. But then I think also coupled into that as a college town, and I feel like I'm connecting a lot with what you're saying in terms of, as a college town, it's not a large city. I was fortunate where I lived in the past to have huge physical infrastructure for queer community, a lot of community centers, about a dozen gay and queer bars, rotating community spaces. And moving to Davis, where there isn't that physical infrastructure outside of the LGBTQIA Resource Center, which is an incredible asset, but especially in physical space, is designed largely for undergraduate students. It really leaves a big gap in terms of spaces and places to just kind of like exist and be fully yourselves. And so I am connecting with what you're saying, B, because I feel like in addition to that, emotional labor of educating folks, there's also just a huge amount of labor that goes into creating these kind of community spaces that, at least in other places I've lived, I've taken for granted the physicality of them. And so as I reflect on my time in Davis and what it's like being queer in Davis, a lot of it is doing a lot of legwork in a decentralized university, in a decentralized town, to create spaces that don't have physical presences or institutional support. And that is an incredible privilege and an amazing thing to be a part of. And there's so many great things that come out of it. But as B's saying, it's a lot, and it takes a lot of balance with self-care and that softness in order to be able to sustain that kind of like community creation without institutional and physical support.
I just want to quickly jump in and say, Kate, as a beneficiary of the spaces that you have built, I really, really appreciate it. I have made friends there, lots of connections, so thank you.
Kate, your topic of safety leads very nicely into our next question. It's a two-part question. So first, do you know of folks, or have you yourself ever experienced negative events in Davis due to being in the LGBTQ plus community? And the second part is, how safe do you feel Davis is for that community?
I guess I'll just jump in again. So I personally have not felt unsafe. Of course, Davis Phoenix Coalition was founded because of an anti-gay hate crime. For those who don't know, our founder, Gloria Partida, her son was brutally beaten in an anti-gay hate crime. They were concerned that he would not survive. And so in the wake of that, she founded the Davis Phoenix Coalition, not just to fight against LGBTQ plus prejudice and bigotry, but we're really intersectional. So we take on all types, racism, ableism, transphobia, obviously. So we do a lot of work around all of these issues. And then of course, I think it's pretty symbolic that now Gloria Partida is the mayor of Davis. So in the time between when the Davis Phoenix Coalition was founded and now, I think there has been a lot of progress within Davis to make it safer for the LGBTQ plus community. But I would just like everything that Kate is saying really resonates with me, because we don't have spaces like I know of, like, for queer adults to get together in Davis, I know of the Guerrilla Queer Bar, which is primarily organized for folks who don't have kids. So I felt very much like a fish out of water. And then of course, there's no place to gather for queer youth, which is the whole reason that the LGBTQ plus youth group was founded. The original intention was to find a space where we could have a youth center in Davis for these youth, because, obviously they can't go to bars. The center on campus is for UC Davis students. Those kids are not, able to travel in many cases. They can't get to Sacramento. And so we would really like to have a space here. Real estate in Davis being what it is, we haven't been able to find an affordable space yet. We are still hoping that this will happen, but the lack of queer spaces here, even though it generally feels safe, the lack of spaces specifically by us for us is a real hole that I think all of us here feel.
I can mainly speak from the undergraduate perspective, but in my experience, when there's an intentionally LGBTQIA plus space, it's done amazingly well. I've forged so many connections and I feel so safe and connected. However, in places that aren't explicitly intentionally made for LGBTQIA plus people, it's often not that safe. And the people, again, I can only really speak from my own experiences. A big part of college life, at least from what I grew up with, was the idea of Greek life. And I joined a co-ed fraternity, and I stayed there for 2 years. And even though there was never physical violence, but like the emotional violence and the emotional hazing was really damaging, but it took me a really long time to unlearn again, with Greek life or societies like that, there's this idea of we're all that you have. So if you lose us, you have no support network. And that's terrifying for someone who, especially if you're a college student, you're maybe hundreds or thousands of miles from the people you know and the people who can support you. And so I stayed in a really unsafe situation for much too long, and I endured a lot of harm. Until I started volunteering at the LGBTQIA plus Resource Center, and people taught me that it was okay to say that that sucks and I should not be treated that way. And even in places where there is a idea of being inclusive, they're often led by heterosexual and cisgender people who maybe don't have the nuance or understanding to lead these discussions or to lead these spaces. And so they end up perpetuating more harm than education. So in my experience, when a space is intentionally made to be safe, it's been wonderful. But even within the classroom, I've had so many professors honestly say like really terrible and damaging things. I guess content warning of just like terrible homophobic. I don't even know how to describe this, but I had a sociology professor who told me that he was part of the LGBTQIA plus community because his friend was a lesbian and said he was an honorary lesbian, so he understands our oppression. And this is a sociology professor who is supposedly teaching people how to be more mindful and more socially conscious, and this is the person who is teaching people. So safe spaces are great. And I think that's why I kind of nestled really hard into the LGBTQIA plus Resource Center, because it's amazing. But we only have a staff of 6 people. We have one of the smallest budgets. We can't really do trainings and education for everyone. So other spaces aren't as great.
Yeah, I think that these are really great points being brought up. And I like drawing on one of the things that you were just saying, B, I feel like one of the things I hear a lot when I talk to other graduate students, as well as friends, and even from my own experience, there's kind of an extra cut that comes when these kind of things happen under the facade of we're Davis, we're progressive, we're inclusive, we've got it together, we love the diversity, which is quickly followed up by, yeah, really just like basic misconceptions, not knowledge. And it lulls you into this false sense of security if you're not on guard against it, because folks are telling you like, yeah, this is an inclusive space, this is a progressive town, things are good here, it's California. And then these really, it becomes quite clear that while there's a lot of surface level agreement with these ideals and these ideas, there's really in many cases a lack of deeper work to understand the issues and the experiences of different folks. And so I hear about that a lot from, students that I work with, as well as, yeah, having B, when you were talking about your sociology professor, I was ticking through some of the things in my head that I've experienced in my classes as a graduate student too. And I mean, yeah, just like outright homophobia in a lot of that. And then I guess just to shift like beyond some of these experiences of bias and microaggressions across the scale, I do want to name too, like there's even issues of physical safety here in Davis. I've, been targeted by street harassment here and called anti-gay slurs, like while walking down the street. And I want to name, compared to other places I've lived, yeah, I can count them on one hand, which is fantastic in 4 years by my book. And, I am a cis white person who is very clearly visually gay, but like at the end of the day, I'm not going to be the target of someone's worst hatred. But those kind of things do happen in Davis. We see, especially amongst people who are, living in the community, amongst, all, different folks who live in town, who are part of the university or not, we see even things like neighbor conflicts being escalated to folks calling the police on queer and trans people and involving police force in things because of this I think lack of community, lack of shared empathy, lack of ability to identify with people who are different than them, amongst many other things. So, you know, extending beyond those interpersonal issues and systemic issues of bias and microaggressions that we're seeing within the town and the university, there are also physical safety concerns, and Davis is, and like Anoosh was talking about in terms of that really horrifying story that started the Davis Phoenix Coalition, these kind of things are happening here too, and people are experiencing violence in multiple ways.
I want to add to that actually, there's still quite a bit of transphobia in Davis. So not only are our trans kids experiencing a lot of transphobia in their schools, and especially anything from insensitivity to outright like non-sympathy from teachers about their transition, about honoring their names and their pronouns. I know, for example, that there was one trans cashier at the Davis Food Co-op who was just experiencing so much transphobia at the register that first she asked to be transferred to the back and then just quit altogether because she just couldn't take it anymore. So especially for folks who aren't gender nonconforming in one way or another, like visually where Kait is, or you know, folks who are non-binary or trans, there's still a lot of work to do, and it can be quite unsafe for folks who are trans in Davis.
Thank you for sharing those stories. And going back briefly to microaggressions, and I just think it's interesting how in liberal spaces, a lot of people like to learn and use the terminology, but the deeper work and like the more uncomfortable work, people don't do as much. And I feel like that is something that I have seen in Davis, where people can like say it's a safe space and use the right words, but when something happens and they get called out on it or something like that, they don't know how to handle it as much. And it is uncomfortable to learn about these things that society has taught us and unlearn all that stuff. But like, that is real work that people should be doing. So I totally understand that. So our next question is kind of what people have been talking about. So for the folks of you that have multiple marginalized identities, how do you think those intersect in your day-to-day life? And do you think that impacts your safety further in Davis?
Woof. Yes. Yeah, just as concisely as I can put it, yes. But I see this in so many different aspects of my life. And what comes to mind at the forefront is just my experience in STEM, in academia, and how much I have felt pushed out. When I do work educating STEM professors and taking on that labor of trying to educate them, they're like, oh, well, I think you're so much more suited for the humanities. Are you sure STEM is for you? And it's little acts like that where there's this distinct separation in people's brains about what social justice work looks like, and it's very tied with the idea of sociology, psychology, the humanities, but people don't realize that it's how we treat people. It's just it should permeate through all areas of study, every interaction with other people, and it's so much harder to be heard when you hold these different intersectionalities, because I still remember feeling like I didn't deserve to be here. I'm a first generation student. I didn't understand why I got in versus countless other people. When I I first started working at a lab, and when I was interviewing for the position, all I kept getting was, "Oh, why didn't you start sooner?" Because I interviewed as a third year. But the answer was just, I didn't know better. No one in my family knew about college. They don't, like, I didn't have any help applying. I didn't have any help going through classes. And so when someone was like, "Oh, you're a pre-med, you haven't worked in a lab yet, you need to get on that, otherwise you're not going to get in." I Once I found out, I jumped in. But then it was, "Oh, well, like, are you sure you should be here?" And I still remember, for Pride Month, I think 2 years ago, we got these really cute little hats, and I wore it to my lab one day, and it said LGBTQIA plus Resource Center on it. And ever since my PI saw it, they started treating me different. And it was slow at first, until she overtly asked me if I was a gay. And I was like, "Well, yes, I am." Um, and it was that feeling of, these opportunities are so hard to come by, and I know I need this for my future. So should I stay in a place that's unsafe for me? Should I stay in a place where I feel emotionally uncomfortable? Is it worth being in pain or being slightly uncomfortable for the future I want to achieve and all the people I want to help? Because I've never seen a non-binary doctor. I tried looking up statistics. There's not much on it. And so I want to be that for other people. So I wondered, is that worth me taking in the pain now? And it's a really terrible position to be put in. And to like hold all that by yourself, I think it's just compounded with like all the experiences of, "Oh, is this happening because I'm a person of color? Is this happening because I'm non-binary? Is this happening because I'm queer? Is this happening because I'm not androgynous?" And it takes a toll, and it hurts a lot.
So B, the first thing I want to say is I have a non-binary doctor to connect you with. So they came to speak to the youth group, and they're awesome and very open. They had a really great, I had connected with them because they had talked on Twitter about seeing a trans patient, and just having been in the position of being a trans patient with a cis doctor and feeling that kind of gap of understanding, and then being able to be the non-binary doctor with a trans patient and have that, shared culture, that I found so like moving and touching, that I immediately invited them to the youth group. So I am happy to connect you with them. But I think this is something that I really want to pull out of this conversation, is that, because of the lack of spaces, because there aren't like gathering points where all of us who do belong to the community can really come together, there's this lack of role models, lack of mentorship, for people who are new, who come here and are feeling alone, especially if you're not part of the university, where do you go? Like, how do you connect with people? One of the things that's a little tough about the YOLO Rainbow families is that we are specifically for parents. And so there are, and in a lot of ways, like, we have, like, it originally started specifically for LGBTQ plus parents, but as marriage equality became legal, people needed less kind of legal support for being same-sex parents. And instead, we ended up getting a lot of parents who are parents of LGBTQ plus kids, especially non-binary, trans, gender non-conforming children. And so for our parents who are really just looking to like socialize with their own community, we don't exactly have that space. And it's something that people really want, and that people really are, again, feeling that absence. I would say in terms of intersectionality, I always feel that for me personally, racism is a greater issue in my life as to what I experience than any kind of homophobia or transphobia. So, and again, also because it's like, I'm not really it's kind of hard to clock me as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. Whereas like my race, can't hide it. So, I would say it's definitely the layering, as Bea was saying, the layering of the different marginalizations that just becomes a burden. And the thing about Davis is because it's so small, there's not a lot of, there's just a small pool of people to try to connect with. And it means that for those of us who get tapped for representation, we get tapped a lot. It ends up being a lot of labor. Part of the reason why I'm doing so many things is just because, like if you live in this town, there tends to be like a small group of people who are doing all the things. And it's because, there isn't a huge pool of marginalized folks. And so, we keep having to tap the same people over and over again to get that input, to get that representation. And, and some of it is because like people who are marginalized have burned out. So, people who have lived here for a long time, they're just like, I've done the advocacy and I'm tired and I don't like, things haven't changed enough and I don't want to do it anymore. And so that's the other problem. So it's, I think and then part of the issue is just that a lot of people in Davis feel like, I've done the work, I know what's going on, without understanding that like the culture changes, we make progress, and and then it's like, well, we got this far, but what we want is actually all the way out here. So we've made a little progress, but that doesn't mean we're done. It means there's still a lot more to catch up on. So, and then if you have intersecting identities, it gets to be a lot. It just gets to be a lot.
Yeah, I think that these are such important points that you both are making. And I feel like even thinking back to some of the examples that all of us had shared prior to this point really exist at these intersections. And like even thinking about like when I was talking about street harassment, I would say about 95% of that is rooted in gender, sexuality, and being a fat person. And so like the way that those come together is absolutely shaping my experience walking the streets of Davis. And I think too about like what you both were talking about in terms of emotional labor and capacity, when so much of the work that's being done, the advocacy work, the organizing work, the creating of community spaces is for largely it's unpaid. Like we've said, it's just people who are doing the most. And then, who's able to do the most? It's people who have financial security. It's people who have privilege, who have protection in their roles. And so that's the people who are able to engage a lot of times in some of these more prominent, space building pieces are people with lots of privilege. And so we see a lot of times community spaces emerging that are really catered around and led by white cis gay men, which have a really specific set of needs and community. And so, but that doesn't necessarily get at all the different ways that our broader communities experience Davis and our needs in all these ways. But then, like Anoosh was saying, it's folks are tired. There's a lot of work that's been done for a long time. And being the folks who are not solely, of course, but like continually tapped to be creating things, is you run out of gas at some point. And it's really important work. It really materially affects our lives. But it's a lot going on.
Yeah, I think you guys bring up really interesting points, and I think it's beautiful to see be that now you can be connected to a doctor who is non-binary and like explore that career. I think for me, I have a transgender brother, and he went through surgery, and we have talked about that as well, and that it's very heartwarming for me to be able to see that connection be able to be made. And then we have talked a lot about what resources are missing for the LGBT community, but what resources currently exist? And can you talk a little bit about the activism community, the activist community in Davis, and what sort of projects that are going on in the community?
So I would say, you know, a lot of what Yellow Rainbow Families is doing is advocating for LGBTQ plus kids in school. So for example, you know, the school district had funds that are going into new construction at schools. And while junior high and high schools have all gender bathrooms, we don't have that at elementary schools because people are like, oh, kids don't come out, you know, it's more like older kids, but that's increasingly not true. Like we see kids who are coming out as trans and non-binary in preschool. And so we need all gender bathrooms at every school level in Davis. Currently in elementary schools, a lot of the bathrooms are converted faculty bathrooms. And that means that kids have to go into adult spaces. And so we have children who like hold their waist all day. And for little kids, like that's not just difficult and uncomfortable and potentially embarrassing, but also can be physically detrimental. So that's one of the main advocacy things that we've been doing. So we had a member of our group attend all the planning meetings and every single time bring up all gender bathrooms. And it's, as far as we know, it's high on the priority list for how we're using those construction funds. You know, something we really want to see that we've been advocating for and have not yet succeeded in doing is to get training for all Davis teachers about how to handle gender nonconforming students in their classes. You know, I find it very just very typical of Davis that our policy in schools for LGBTQ plus kids is really good. So on paper, you know, Davis schools should be very inclusive. It's the actual practice in classrooms where it tends to fall down. And it's, in a lot of cases, it's people who just don't know how to handle those situations. But, you know, when you're dealing with children, one wrong move can be something that affects a child for a long time. One story I tell a lot is one day there was a substitute PE teacher who hadn't been trained in the policy of DJUSD and divided the kids by boys and girls. And like the one kid in class who didn't identify as either a boy or girl, the entire class ended up debating if this child was a boy or girl and therefore which side that child should go to, which is not something you ever want your gender nonconforming child to have to experience. Like that's just unacceptable. So, so those are kind of the local advocacy things we're doing. And then a lot of our energy is also just looking at national organizing. You know, currently we know that Republican-led state legislatures are really going after the rights of trans kids, attacking kids who, you know, want to participate in sports as their true gender, and trying to interfere with trans kids' access to gender affirming medical care. So those are other issues that we're very concerned about and advocating for. But, you know, in the past, like one of our successes, we did advocate for a gender, like a non-binary gender marker on driver's licenses and California IDs. So that's something that we did contribute to, and that was a successful effort. So those are some of the things that we're working on.
Yeah, a lot of the work that I can speak a little bit to what the undergraduates and the scholar staff at the UC Davis LGBTQIA plus Resource Center are doing, but we have, especially with everything that's going on with the pandemic, we've kind of reinvested in this idea of basic needs and survival, because that's something that isn't being catered to enough. So we talk about how can we put money in the hands of our community? How can we directly employ people who are holding these marginalized identities and may not have work elsewhere? One of our previous our office coordinator, Ness, started a QT pantry. So in our physical space, we have a space where there's food. So if you don't have access to the UC Davis pantry, it's not as regulated. So people can just, no shame, no judgment, you can just go and get food. Or we have we call it our closet. We have a closet where if you either don't feel physically safe or don't have the financial security to buy gender affirming clothes, our gender affirmation closet, you can go in there and you can find clothes that make you feel like yourself. Or people have even donated makeup, and people have donated other like shapewear, and like we have education work on how to safely use shapewear, because certain, like for example, binding practices aren't safe, and people don't know that because we don't talk about it enough. So a lot of the work that we're centering is going back to those basic needs of making sure that people are fed, making sure that people have safe housing, making sure that people have clothes that represent themselves. I think even 2 years ago, we had an initiative where we bought warm clothes like gloves and jackets for folks because Davis winters can get really cold. And so we've been focusing a lot on basic needs for the people of our community.
Yeah, Bea did an awesome job describing a lot of the work that we do at the Resource Center. So I won't replicate that, but I will say, when I think about some of the amazing things that are going on in our community, there are a lot of really fantastic groups of people who are trying to create community spaces, both originating from on campus as well as off campus. And we talked about some of them, things like Gorilla Queer Bar, which during the non-COVID times had twice monthly bar takeovers located in Davis, just to kind of create those community spaces. We have Dyke Days, which is a Facebook group for folks. We used to do farmers market meetups and watch parties and all kinds of different parties, and creating these community spaces. And of course, during the pandemic, it morphed a little bit more into just broader organizing and getting people to actions happening in the Sacramento and Davis area. I think about too, we're starting what we call the Big Gay Garden, which is out of a lot of grad students, and meeting exactly what Bea's talking about in terms of the basic needs, both in terms of physical food, of course, but also skill sharing, knowledge sharing, resource sharing. So we've recently secured we have a group of, I don't know, anywhere between 3 to 15 people who come together every couple of weeks to dream visions of a queer utopia in 4 garden beds. Maybe that's overselling it a bit, but there's a lot of really, really great things going on to share skills and knowledges and resources, and there's so much brilliance in our communities. And a lot of what we're seeing as far as like advocacy and organizing, for at least speaking to from my vantage point as a queer graduate student, A lot of the things that are going on is throwing weight behind these broader movements in terms of like, because of the way that these issues uniquely impact our queer and trans communities. So things like the protests around the cost of living adjustment, COLA, over the last year and a half. I mean, queer and trans people are, uniquely oftentimes closed off from familial wealth and financial support, as well as experience increased levels of job discrimination and employment insecurity. And so things like when graduate students aren't getting paid enough to live in Davis, given the cost of living, we're uniquely left vulnerable, our communities, and so are uniquely impacted. That same thing with issues of policing. So when I think about the kind of advocacy work that I see a lot of graduate and professional students doing, and I'm part of myself, it's a lot of that, just really advocating for these issues that are impacting everyone and maybe have a unique queer and trans angle. Another really beautiful thing that I see coming together, and especially was so excited for prior to the pandemic, was starting to do a little bit more coalition building between these community-based groups like GQB, Guerrilla Queer Bar, Dyke Days, the LGBTQIA Resource Center, the Lambda Law Association, which is for law students who are queer and trans, the Broad Spectrum, which is vet students who are queer and trans, as well as the Graduate School of Management has a group for queer and trans MBA students. So bringing folks together under these broader umbrellas and throwing big queer happy hours to kind of bring together these community-based groups, university-based groups, and start building more capacity for both community and change work through these social gatherings.
I wanted to add in terms of resources, like I feel like we're still very dependent on Sacramento for a lot of resources. So like the Gender Health Center is where a lot of our trans folks, both adults and youth, go in order to get services and get information and connect with other folks. We also depend a lot on the LGBTQIA Center in Sacramento for resources and things like that. So, again, this is why I'm just going to keep plugging the fact that we want some kind of center here in Davis in case there's any angel donors out there that want to help us with this goal. But, Davis is really a place where a lot of queer youth, not just in Davis, but also in Yolo County, come. I mean, we have people who attend the Yolo Rainbow Families events who are in Solano County, because we're actually closer to some areas of Solano County than the places in like Vacaville or Fairfield. And so there's if Davis is kind of a safer area than a lot of places in Yolo County, like Davis is more accessible to a lot of the queer youth that are in other areas of Yolo than Sacramento is. And so it'd be really wonderful if we could bring some of these resources to Davis, and therefore, provide safer spaces for kids who are in rural areas and really don't have many opportunities to connect, to find other kids like them, to find information that is affirming, and to connect with other people like them. So, if anyone's got some spare money lying around and needs a project to support the future of the LGBTQIA community, we have a great project for you.
Continuing on this, what is it? The queer utopia conversation about the things that we could have. Because I realized we were talking a lot about safety and a lot of the scary parts of sometimes being a part of the community and the oppression that happens. But what is one of the things or multiple things that you love about being part of the LGBTQ plus community?
I would love to jump right in. So If anyone is familiar with the work of the UC Davis LGBTQIA plus Resource Center, we typically have this annual event called Queer Leadership Retreat. It's really wonderful, around 40 to 50 people. We all go to the woods, we have workshops, we have community building. It's an amazing space, but obviously we couldn't do that with the pandemic. And so we reimagined it this year by calling it Queer Community Wisdom. And instead of something being led or facilitated solely by the center, we reached out to the knowledge of our community, and we had grad students involved in cohort mentorship. We had people involved in most of Kait's housemates had wonderful, wonderful workshops for us about aromatherapy, about gardening, about cooking with cultural connections. And there's just such a spirit of mutual aid and wanting to help other people. I think I can be my softest and my most authentic self whenever I'm around other people of the LGBTQIA plus community. And a lot of the work that I do is about bringing these people together because, you know, when you face hardships, when you face oppression, it cultivates this understanding of what it feels like to be oppressed. And in my experience, most of the people in response to this have doubled down on their softness and have doubled down on their kindness. And the support and the growth that I have felt by being part of this community has been so influential to, like, it's making it really hard for me to leave Davis. I don't really know how I'm going to set down the same roots in the same community in somewhere else.
Yeah, well, B, we don't want you to, I selfishly don't want you to leave regardless, even though you certainly have the skills to create community wherever you're going to go. And I have no doubt about that. Selfishly, I'd love nothing more than if you stayed in Davis forever, but recognizing that may not be what's best for you. I think that for me, being queer is the greatest gift of the world. Like, as soon as you asked this, my smile just spread across my face. I think about that uniquely as a person who's, you know, in my early 30s right now, and I see so many of my peers going through massive changes in their lives as they, you know, hit my straight peers, that is, as they hit these kind of milestones of, for many of them, getting married and having children and going through all these beautiful changes. And I think for me, being queer has just opened up this immense circle of possibility in terms of thinking differently about what family means, about what community means, what my priorities are. And it's incredible because I feel so supported and so held in community that I'm not the only person having these wild ideas. As I think deeply about like what it means to define a life for myself and to create ways of being and relating that are different than, you know, the roadmaps that are laid out for us as young people. And so having community to really think deeply about what it means to be a person, to you know, love other people, to build lives in these different ways, that there are different ways of organizing a life outside of, you know, like a standalone nuclear family. And that's, of course, always an option too. But I think that's what's absolutely wonderful. And I feel, you know, so grateful in Davis to have just like an exceptional community of like beautiful, wonderful, amazing, brilliant humans that were brought together in queer spaces. And to have that family here as a person who lives, you know, 2,000 miles away from, you know, my family of origin, which is so difficult to be able to create family here, is not something I take for granted. And I really like hold my queerness as a central part of how I live my day-to-day life in really joyous, happy ways.
So I came out when I was 19, which means I have been identified as queer for more than half my life, I'll say. So It's honestly hard to imagine my life without queerness anymore. And like, as the kids in the LGBTQ plus youth group know, I love queering everything. So, I've identified as queer for a long time, for decades at this point. I recently, I think it's been a year now, I came out as genderqueer, which was something where I was like, gender diversity is something for younger folks. Like, surely I can't identify as gender diverse. But then once I was like, there are people that come out as trans and like, at any age. And so it's, I finally could claim genderqueer, and it finally felt like the right identity for me after all this time. I'm also neuroqueer. So I love kind of the general principle of queerness, of being like, there are human possibilities that are not generally accepted in our culture, that aren't, that's just not part of the norms, but just because it's not part of the norms doesn't mean that it isn't like natural or deeply human or whatever. And so for me, queerness is that space that a lot of people don't even think about, but for the rest of us is like really deeply, truly who we are and where we live all the time. And that bond that it creates is something that I really treasure. And as like watching youth in Davis come out and become part of that culture and really discover themselves, like, there's really nothing quite like seeing a kid like claim a trans identity, or claim a non-binary identity, or discover, like, come out as pan, and just really watch them kind of unfurl. And I keep using the word bloom, into really feeling themselves, like finding the word that describes this thing that they've been feeling, and then understanding that it's a place to inhabit, that other people live in, and that other people have gone before. And to just see that just like warms my heart so much. So yeah, I mean, like, I can't imagine my life without queerness. And I feel like it's an incredible gift in my life. And it's a gift that I want to give other kids, kids that are coming up in the community, if that's the right for them. So it's all the warm fuzzies.
Yeah, I definitely say I'm a lucky individual in the fact that I never experienced gender dysphoria and the pain that comes along with that, but I have experienced gender euphoria. The first time that I had one of the community coordinators who's now graduated, Joel, I was just talking to her and I was like, hi, do you think you could just, you and me, try using they, them pronouns? And the first time they used it with me, I like wanted to cry. It just felt right. Or the first time how I chose my name and people just accepted it and used it. And it never felt wrong before, like it never felt particularly bad or harmful. It was just kind of didn't mean anything to me. But now that I found what makes me so joyful, I don't know how to give up feeling this affirmed and this like myself.
I just want to say, yeah, totally feel all of that, all of what you said. Warms my heart. And I think that I just love the ability of like the questions that I get to ask about the world and about myself, and the conversations that I get to have, because I just feel like the understanding of people who have figured themselves out or in the process of figuring themselves out, understanding how society has taught us and how we relate to the world and how the world relates to itself. I just find that so fascinating and interesting and wonderful to be able to explore with my friends. So yeah, it's a great community to be a part of.
So I think this question is really important, and it's, what advice would you give to someone struggling with their gender identity and or sexual orientation?
I guess I'll jump on that. Find your people. Nothing is going to help you really, like, you know, figure out, is this the right identity for me? Is this, you know, is this who I am? Then finding your people. Just, you know, find people that you can talk to about it, even if it ends up not being right, you know, and you're like, oh, this isn't, you know, I'm interested, but I don't know. But just being able to be in a space where, you know, you can put out the question and people will be like, yes, that's a valid question to explore. And let's talk to you about our experience with this. And just being able to find that space, that's really going to help you. You know, just being able to be with people who will show you what that's like, and also, you know, be your cheerleader instead of being like, ooh, you know, any kind of negative reaction is going to make it hard for you to really have an honest conversation with yourself about how you feel about it. And so being able to be around people who are going to support you and going to help you with that, that's crucial. It's crucial.
This is kind of a funny piece of advice, but it helped me immensely. Labels are a lot like horoscopes. So there's some people who are like, I don't need that. I don't, and that's fine. You know, some people don't vibe with it, and it's fine if labels or words aren't your thing. You don't need to find a word. If you don't really care about it, you don't gotta. You can just exist in your world. But there are other people like me who I'm a Virgo Libra cusp, and my rising is a, you know, so like there are people like that who I really like studying. I really like exploring words, and finding a word makes me feel happy. And so it's okay if that's your thing, but I think that there's always this like rush of like, oh, but like, what are you? You know, like, are you pan? Are you bi? Are you gay? Are you whatever? Um, if that's not your thing, you don't gotta. Just do whatever. Like, it's about feeling that like soft warmth where you're like, yeah, that's me. Like, if no word makes that, then there are emotions that no words can describe, and that's valid. You're valid, you know? And if you find a word that makes you feel that way, then that's wonderful, but it doesn't have to end in a word.
Yeah, I'm honestly shocked that we made it this far into the panel without touching astrology prior to this. So thanks for going there, B. Yeah, I think in terms of advice, like I mentioned, I grew up in a really rural town, and a lot of the work that I do is with rural folks, rural queer and trans folks. And so I think if you're able to access community spaces, fantastic, but not everyone is, and that's okay. And lucky for young people now, many of y'all have the internet, which is fantastic. And so there are spaces that exist there. But even beyond that, I think one of the things that really changed things for me in terms of coming to understand myself as a queer person was understanding that I was not the first person to be having these thoughts. In a rural space, it feels unthinkable. You don't have role models in a lot of cases. It is just unthinkable. There are not words to describe the feelings and experiences that you have, and you just feel funny. But you are not the first person to feel funny in these ways. And there's a long legacy of people who have been creating and building brilliant, beautiful, different lives. And so learn about that, because you are not the first. But also but at the same time as you are not the first person, you also get to be the first person in leading these new ways of being. And so while we have histories and we have so many things to learn from, and you can perhaps see pieces of yourselves in your journey, the beautiful thing about being a queer or trans young person is you're really at the front. You're getting to forge new ways of being and relating that other people could not dream of. And that is so exciting and intimidating and scary as hell. But you're not alone, because guess what? Everyone in that history and your lineage did the same thing. And that is a privilege to be able to step into that. And so as I think about queer young people, especially queer young people like me, where this was unthinkable in the places that I grew up, don't worry, you're not the first, but you get to be the first in many, many ways.
We have a really great audience question that I think fits into potentially helping people struggle with their identity, help them figure themselves out, how they are, and creating a space that's safe for that. So what can cisgender folks do to be a supportive ally?
Okay, similar to astrology, I don't know if there's any D&D nerds out there. I'm a D&D nerd. If y'all are looking for something to watch Dimension 20, Ali Beardsley, non-binary icon. But one of their series, they have this saying, there is strength in sweetness. And I don't know if y'all can tell my vibe, but like softness and sweetness is like my entire thing. And I think that it's so hard to be soft in these spaces. And I think if you can make the space to be sweet, to be kind, to show them love and affirmation and warmth, that there's always going to be, excuse my language, but like shitty people. There's always going to be ignorance. And even if you have the best intentions, you can still cause harm. But to take that and hold them and let all of your trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming family, friends know that you are holding them and that they are safe with you. That's what stays with people, you know. There's like a lot of times where people use the wrong pronouns for me or dead name me. And it sucks, but it's like, okay, like I've come to expect it. But what stands out to me is when my cis friends will be like, oh, no, they use they, them pronouns, or their name's B, you know, and that labor's taken off of me. That's what sits with me. I just kind of stare in awe. Like all of like the pain or like the ignorance, whatever mistake was made, it kind of fades away because I'm sitting there and I'm like, someone's thinking about me, like I don't have to be the only one protecting myself. And that is so revolutionary and so powerful. And it seems so small. Like do it in the moment. Like honestly, call people in. Like don't just be like, oh, hey, I noticed earlier in the meeting someone misgendered you. Say it in the moment. Be like, no, they use they them pronouns. Just like end it right there, because having that immediate impact, that's what's going to last.
I have a whole list, but I'll try to keep this compact. Let's see. First of all, just take trans and gender nonconforming folks seriously. Whatever they say their name is, that's their name. Whatever they say their pronouns are, those are their pronouns. You know, just like really take it seriously. Like it's good manners to use someone's correct name. It's good manners to use someone's correct pronouns. And like, I know there's a lot of folks who are like, what if I use the wrong pronoun? And then there's this thing of like over apologizing, like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Just like correct yourself and move on. Like, don't make it a big deal. Just correct yourself and move on. So that's one thing. I can't believe I have to say this, but I do have to keep saying this. Don't ask about people's genitals. Like, if you would not talk to somebody about their body parts, if they're cisgender, don't ask them about it. If they're trans, just don't, it's none of your business. If it's private for a cis person, it's private for a trans person. Yes, people do this. It's like, people ask the most invasive questions of trans folks you would not believe. So yeah, just privacy, just like basic, decent, everyday privacy, respect it. I'm definitely having a situation where a lot of people are like, you know, this person, it's frequently with kids, but not always with kids. You know, this person is identifying as non-binary or as trans, and I think it's a phase. Okay, those of us who like have identified as lesbian, gay, bi, etc., like we've all experienced this. Oh, I think it's a phase. It's not a phase. You know, like, we think of phases as something that is temporary, that somebody's trying out, that it's experimental, and then they go back to being them, whatever that is. People evolve in their life. Like, you could consider my period of identifying as cisgender before I really like claimed gender fluid and gender queer as my gender identity as a phase. You know, and now I'm like actually who I really am. But the thing is that, like, as people explore, you've got to take that exploration seriously. Like, even if someone is like, for example, I have a friend who identified as a trans man for a while. And then at some point he was like, you know what? I'm actually non-binary. So you could say the period that he was a trans man was a phase, but at the same time, taking him seriously, using his name, using his pronouns, you know, respecting everything that he was going through as a trans man, that all mattered. It was all important. And now that he identifies as non-binary, it still matters. It's still important. I'm sorry. Now that they identify as non-binary, oh my goodness, this is the problem with, like, as you know someone over the arc of their life, sometimes you get mixed up. So my bad. So they are now non-binary. It's still who they feel, you know, it's still who they are in their heart. You have to go with it. Like, you have to really respect that person's journey, whatever it is, because people can change their minds and people can like discover a new facet of who they are. And so to dismiss it as a phase, like, it's whatever evolution that person goes through, every part of that evolution is valid. So just respect it.
I'd also just like to say, gender is fluid, sexuality is fluid. And you know what, even if things are a phase, that's fine. You know, when cis people, like cis women get married, they go from Miss to Mrs. and no one questions that transition. They just go with it. They're like, okay, now you're Mrs. whatever. Same thing. If it's a phase, that's fine. I was a student, now I'm not, you know, it doesn't make the time when I was a student any less valid, you know, any questioning of, oh, it's just a phase, or, oh, because it will change in the future, I don't need to respect them now. That's internalized transphobia. That's what that is.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just like the human life is so long. So like your identity might change just because, like B said, like your life changes. And one of my favorite things is like going on Facebook every year in June and seeing like all the new wave of people that are coming out and being like, welcome. Because I just feel like every year more and more people like realize things about themselves. And then I'm like, oh yeah, more people that I know are queer. And to get to something that Anoosh said, in my friend group, we call it like the oh shit, sorry. So like if you like, mess up someone's pronouns or someone accidentally gets dead named or something like that, you should be like, oh shit, sorry. And then you don't make that mistake again and you apologize and you move on, because people just wanted to be treated and respected for the humans that they are.
Yeah, and I think just to throw out a couple of other thoughts about this, so like bold, underscore, underline everything that everyone else said, great stuff. I think one of the things that I see a lot is people love to pin change work on some abstract other, like, oh, well, like it's got to come from, someone else has to be doing this. And so when I think about, things that cis people can be doing is like stopping, standing where you are, you have power. Like it does not matter. And I hope you're going to bat way above your head. That's absolutely what you need to be doing, but you also need to be going to bat right where you stand. So whether that's simple things like looking at like, okay, I work at a cafe in Davis. And so, why are we using people's names on their credit cards to call out their drink orders? Why aren't we just asking people for their names? Why are we gendering these single stall bathrooms? I mean, there are just things that everyone can be doing exactly where you are. This kind of work is not just for some abstract other. And yeah, I hope you're going to bat above your head and advocating for change. But if you're not standing there and looking at the practices that are baked in as part of your roles in formalized workspaces, as part of community spaces, as part of the ways that you're moving through the world, you're really missing a big spot right there.
So we only have a couple minutes left, so I think we're probably only going to ask one or two more questions. Okay, so this is a combined question, kind of getting back to stuff we were talking about earlier. So how can we address harmful stereotypes about the LGBTQ plus community? And when you experience negative comments or harassment based on your identity, what do you do?
I would say that the work starts a lot sooner than you think it does. Don't wait until an LGBTQI person is harmed. If you hear relatives and they're like, oh, it's just like a private space, but they're like talking and they're saying homophobic things, they're gonna keep thinking that until someone corrects them or someone does that work. And you don't need to wait for someone to get harmed to start doing that work. It's similar to what Kait said. Like if someone's like, oh, well, like we haven't encountered any issues with like the bathrooms before, that's like saying our spaces don't need to be accessible because we haven't had any people complain about it yet. You don't know what harm has been caused. You don't know what people aren't talking about, and you can be doing that work so much sooner. And then on the internal side, like when you're facing stereotypes, when you're facing harmful rhetoric, I think that it's okay not to fight. Like it's okay to choose yourself and to be like, I'm not going to give you the emotional labor or the emotional capacity to engage with you right now. Like what you want is a reaction out of me. And that's so difficult because I'm gonna be real, I'm a Leo Mars, I like to fight. But I still remember there was just like a really like a Facebook fight over the internet, over social media. It's so much harder too because you want to just go off. And I was like, look, if you want to continue this harmful rhetoric, I'm not going to engage with anymore. You can unfriend me, unfollow me, whatever. And they were like, oh, that's just like modern identity politics. We're stopping the conversation because you don't like where it's going. And it's, no, I'm choosing myself. I don't owe you this labor. And that's the thing to remember. All you got to do is survive and hopefully thrive. So rely on your support networks, get through the day, and remember that you are worth so much more than any bullshit that someone who doesn't know you, like, they don't know who you are. They can't know every facet of who you will be and who you have been and who you are right now. They don't know you. And again, it's hard to internalize that and use it in the moment. It's a skill. It's like a muscle. You need to keep working it. But after a while, you'll be able to just go to your support network and be like, hey, I had a really hard day. Can we just like do something soft right now? Or like, hey, can you just like, I will, with my friends, I'm just like, hey, can you just like say nice things to me right now? I need words of affirmation like right now. And it helps. Tell your support network what you need. They'll help you.
I just want to throw B, I love what you're saying, and it's resonating so deeply. As a person who like does research with and on queer and trans experiences in multiple settings, and a lot of times really difficult, heavy, like the research is emotionally really heavy, and it's really hard to hold space for those stories, so many of which touch on like, you know, my own trauma and things like that. Like it's really heavy, hard work. And then, you know, my professional life is being professionally gay at this point. Like everything in my life is queer in a lot of ways. And so when I think about the, like, how do you deal with like these things when they come up, I think to, you know, what I do in terms of like how I'm holding these difficult stories and moving through these emotionally difficult things. And I think remaining firm in the knowledge that some people are going to be committed to misunderstanding you, and that's on them. That's not on you. And I think that goes exactly with what B's talking about in terms of like, leave it. That is their work to do. That is not your work to do, baby. And I also try to, right now, as I'm doing all this research, doing all this work, I keep a list of things that bring me queer joy. So I have a folder of crappy memes. I have group messages that I know I can go to. I have people have suggested like season 8, episode 2 of such and such show. There's this. And so I keep this list of queer joys and things that I can reach to when things get really hard to be queer. When in those moments where it's really, really hard to hold that space, to hold that identity, and it just feels really heavy, I got my list. And so I know exactly where I can go to remind myself that okay, that's on them. This is what queer is like for me. And that really helps me.
That's a really huge question, and I know we're out of time. So, yeah, in terms of, you know, I feel like the most stereotypes I'm coming across right now are of trans folks. And so for, you know, cis people, just, I really want you to just be like, trans women are women, trans men are men. But what about athletes that trans women are women, trans men are men? Like that's the end of that conversation. It's period. You know, in terms of harmful stereotypes, when that happens to me, you know, for me, like my touchstone for any aggression on any of my marginalized identities is go to community. Just go to community, because that is always where you're going to draw your strength. That's always where you're going to feel protected. So just go to community, because, you know, that is where we really are. Whatever stereotypes are out there, it's like, but these are the people that I actually know. And these are the people who love and support me the way that I am, and, you know, see me for who I am. And so touch base with community is, you just cannot go wrong.
Okay, great. So that's our time. Thank you to all of our panelists for coming out and spending the last hour and a half with us. You can find out more information on queer life on campus at lgbtqia.ucdavis.edu and in the city of Davis at davisphoenixco.org. For the audience, thank you guys for coming out. We will be posting the video in the next day or so on the Vanguard website. And if you want to find more information and learn more about what Jordan and I do in the city news desk, Jordan is going to link our social media into the chat. And if any of our panelists also want to put any resources in the chat, they are welcome to do so.
Awesome. So the City News Desk and the Vanguard cover pressing local issues and are able to do so through the support of the community. So if you would like to become a monthly subscriber and help us continue in our important coverage, you can find the information on the Davis Vanguard website on how to subscribe. And now we will turn it back to David. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, Jordan and Lauren, and thank you to all the guests for this great discussion. I learned a lot. We'll have another webinar on the 29th, 2 weeks from tomorrow, on housing in Davis. So everybody's welcome to join us then. Until then, thanks and have a safe weekend.